It was 9:47 on a Thursday morning when my phone buzzed, and I glanced at the screen expecting a sweet message from my son Brian, maybe a picture of the kids, or a casual, "Mom, are you on your way?" Instead, what I saw made my stomach tighten and my breath catch in my throat. "Mom, please don't come by today. We just had the house cleaned, and I don't want it to smell like old food." I read it once, twice, and then a third time, willing the words to rearrange themselves into something softer, something I could bear. But they didn't. They sat there cold and sharp, like a notice of eviction. I was sitting on the number 34 bus heading down Broad Street in Newark, New Jersey, with the plastic container of beef stew balanced on my lap, the one I had started cooking at 5 a.m. because I knew how much my grandkids loved it. That same round Tupperware with faded Mickey Mouse stickers on the lid, the same one I used to pack Brian's lunch when he was little, was now apparently the reason I wasn't welcome in my own son's home. My hands tightened around it, and for a moment I thought the lid might crack from the pressure. The smell of onions, carrots, and slow-cooked meat seeped faintly into the air, a smell that once made Brian run to the kitchen shouting, "Mom, is dinner ready?" when he was a boy. Now that same smell was treated like an offense, a contamination that didn't fit into the spotless suburban life he and his wife had built. My body trembled so suddenly that I pressed the stop button and got off 2 stops early at Market Street, my knees almost buckling under me as I sat down on a cold metal bench. People rushed by, lawyers in crisp suits with leather briefcases, young students with earbuds in, mothers juggling strollers and diaper bags, everyone moving with purpose as though they belonged somewhere. Everyone but me. My destination had just been erased with one careless text, as though I were nothing more than an unwanted delivery. The bus pulled away and I sat staring at the container, steam still fogging the inside of the lid, the stew that had been simmered with my love, cooling with every passing second. I thought back to the first time Brian ever tried my stew. He was 7, and it had been snowing outside our old duplex in East Orange. His cheeks were red from sledding with the neighborhood kids, and he had run in the door stomping snow from his boots, throwing his arms around me as I ladled a bowl into his hands. "Smells like home, Mom," he said, pressing his face against my apron. That memory felt like a cruel joke now because the same smell was suddenly an embarrassment. I sat there for nearly an hour, watching traffic lights change, buses arrive and depart, people meet and separate, while I clung to that container as if it were the last thread tying me to my family. I remembered when Brian bought me my first smartphone 5 years ago. "Now you'll never miss a thing, Mom," he had said, his smile so warm as he taught me how to swipe, tap, send emojis. I had stumbled through the instructions, but his patience had been endless. I thought technology would keep us closer. Irony has a sense of humor sharper than knives because that very device was now the wall keeping me away. His message came exactly 7 minutes after mine. "On my way over, honey. Bringing you some stew. Can't wait to see the kids." He had seen my words, thought about them, and crafted the most cutting excuse possible. Not a lie about errands, not even a polite deferral, just the brutal truth that I was no longer wanted. I lifted my eyes to the billboard across the street, flashing an ad for a luxury car, and I thought how much my son had changed since marrying Vanessa, his college sweetheart turned corporate executive. She liked her things polished, her life perfect, her house pristine. Somewhere along the way, Brian started to care more about spotless marble countertops than the woman who raised him alone. When I finally pushed myself up from that bench and walked toward the bus home, the October sun cut through the air with that golden light that usually made me smile, but that morning it felt like mockery. On the ride back to my apartment in a crumbling brick building off Ferry Street, I stared out the window at the streets I had walked with Brian as a boy. Our corner deli, where I bought him hot cocoa. The park, where I taught him to ride his red bike with training wheels. The corner pharmacy, where I once rushed in at midnight for children's Tylenol when his fever spiked. Every corner whispered, we were a family, while the silence of my phone screamed, not anymore. When I got home, I reheated the stew and sat alone at my wobbly kitchen table, the fluorescent light overhead flickering, each spoonful tasting like loneliness. Somewhere between the third and fourth bite, a thought began to take shape inside me, as terrifying as it was undeniable. Maybe all those years of sacrifices, of double shifts and aching joints and endless nights without sleep had been for nothing. Maybe motherhood wasn't a guarantee of love returned, but just a gamble that left you empty.
My mind drifted back to the night Brian was born, February 2nd, 1985, St. Michael's Hospital in Newark. I labored for 18 hours, clutching the sides of that narrow bed, and when they finally laid him on my chest, wrapped in a thin blue blanket, I thought my life had found its purpose. His father, Mark, lasted exactly 4 months and 6 days, a day etched in my memory because he left on my 33rd birthday, saying he had things to figure out in California, and fatherhood wasn't in his plans. He packed his duffel bag and walked out without even kissing Brian goodbye. I sat on the kitchen linoleum that night, my baby asleep in a borrowed crib, tears soaking my hands until there were no more to shed. And I made a promise. I would raise this boy to know love so deep he would never feel abandoned. That promise became my religion. I cleaned offices at night, houses during the day, working until my hands cracked from bleach and my back screamed with pain. I paid Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow downstairs, $10 a week to watch Brian while I worked nights. And every morning I hurried home to make him pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse before walking him to school. On his 5th birthday, I bought him a second-hand bicycle from a pawn shop in Irvington, saving quarters for months in a coffee tin. The clerk had smirked when I poured the coins onto the counter, asking if it was for my grandson. "For my son," I said proudly, holding my head high as Brian hugged the bike with squeals of joy. He fell 7 times that afternoon in the park, but climbed back up each time, his scraped knees glowing red, his laughter echoing, shouting, "Look, Mom, I can do it!" By the time he was 9, he asked me if he could take guitar lessons. They cost $40 a week, more than I could ever afford, but I stopped buying coffee on my way to work, patched up my old coat instead of replacing it, and scrubbed floors on Saturdays at the diner to make it possible. I sat on a folding chair outside the music room every Tuesday evening, listening to him strum "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," my heart swelling like it had won the lottery. When he graduated high school with honors, I clapped so hard my palms burned. And when he whispered, "Mom, I'll take care of you one day," I believed him with every fiber of my being. I helped him move into his first apartment, carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs until my knees buckled, bought him his first microwave with my tax refund because I wanted him to start off right. But everything shifted when he married Vanessa, the polished woman who looked at me like I was a smudge on her otherwise perfect life. The phone calls became shorter, the visits rarer, my role shrinking from mother to unpaid babysitter. I told myself it was just adjustment, but slowly I became the shadow that kept his house running while his wife pretended I didn't exist. And now, with one cruel text, even that shadow had been dismissed. That night, as I scraped the last of the stew into a container, the hum of my old refrigerator filling the silence, the weight of realization pressed down on me until I almost couldn't breathe. My son, the boy I had carried through every storm, now saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. And for the first time in 67 years, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I deserved better than this.
That Friday morning, I woke up before the sun, the same way I had done for decades, the habit of a woman who had always worked 2 jobs and never had the luxury of sleeping in. And for the first time in years, I didn't know where I was supposed to be. Normally, by 6:15 a.m., I'd be out the door with my bus pass in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other, ready to take the number 21 down Bloomfield Avenue, then transfer to a train toward Montclair, where Brian and Vanessa lived in their 3-bedroom colonial house with the wraparound porch and 2 SUVs in the driveway. My mornings were mapped out like military drills. Get the kids dressed, pack their lunches, drive them to school, pick them up, help with homework, cook dinner, bathe them, tuck them in, clean up, and then make the 9:47 train back to Newark, dragging my tired body up the 3 flights of stairs to my 1-bedroom apartment with its flickering light and peeling linoleum. But that Friday, there was no plan. I lay there in my bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the radiator hiss and clang, and realized that if I didn't show up, no one would starve, the sun would still rise, life would still continue. That realization both terrified me and freed me. I thought back to the day Brian was born, to the promises I made in the delivery room, that I would be the kind of mother who never let him down, who filled every gap his father left behind, who would sacrifice everything so he never felt less than other kids. And for 38 years, I had done exactly that, giving him every ounce of my strength, every dollar I earned, every dream I postponed. But as I sat there sipping instant coffee and staring out the window at the city waking up, it hit me with a sharp sting. Maybe he had learned to expect it, to treat my sacrifices not as gifts, but as obligations. I remembered vividly the day of his 10th birthday when I spent an entire week cleaning offices downtown just to afford a Nintendo Game Boy because I knew how badly he wanted it. The look on his face when he unwrapped it was worth the blisters on my hands and the ache in my spine. "You're the best mom in the world," he had whispered, hugging me so tight my ribs hurt. That memory used to make me proud. But now, it left me hollow, because somewhere between that Game Boy and his first big corporate job, something had shifted. I had gone from being the best mom to being the help. That morning, I decided to walk. No destination, just put one foot in front of the other and breathe air that wasn't filled with the stale guilt of my apartment. I wandered past the old library where I used to take Brian on Saturdays for story hour, past the park where I used to push him on the swings, past the diner where we shared pancakes when we didn't have much, but we had each other. Each place whispered a version of our history, a history that now felt erased by Vanessa's cold smiles and Brian's compliance. I ended up downtown near the Prudential Center, surrounded by tourists snapping photos and teenagers skateboarding, and on impulse, I bought a ticket to the Newark Museum. I had lived in the city for over 6 decades and never once walked through those doors. I wandered among exhibits of American art and ancient artifacts, and for 2 hours, no one asked me to babysit, no one told me I smelled like food, no one dismissed me as old-fashioned. For the first time in months, I felt like a person again. My phone buzzed in my purse, Brian's name flashing on the screen. My hand hovered, but I didn't answer. A second call came, then a third. Finally, a voicemail. "Mom, where are you? The kids are waiting. I have a meeting. Vanessa has errands. This is really not like you. Call me back." His voice was sharp, irritated, as if my absence were a deliberate sabotage instead of a small act of self-preservation. I let it go. For years, I had trained myself to drop everything at his call, to sprint toward every emergency, to bend until I broke. That day, I chose silence. By the time I got home, I had 12 missed calls and 6 messages, some panicked, some angry, all assuming I would eventually fold. But I didn't. Instead, I reheated leftover stew and sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on, realizing that for the first time in nearly 4 decades, I had made a choice for myself. My mind wandered back to when Brian was 16 and begged me for money to go on his first big school trip to Washington, D.C. I had $47 to my name that week, but I pawned my mother's locket, the only piece of jewelry I had ever owned that wasn't from a thrift shop, just so he could go. He had returned bubbling with stories, thanking me, promising I'd be his date for the White House when he became president one day. That promise, like so many, had evaporated into adulthood. He wasn't cruel, not outright, but cruelty doesn't always come with fists or screams. Sometimes it comes with silence, with indifference, with texts that tell you your love is unwelcome because it smells. That night, lying in bed, I let my mind replay every moment of motherhood, from the scraped knees to the late-night ER visits, from the sleepless nights of teething to the proud tears at graduation. I thought of how every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, I had been there. And now, as I stared at the shadowy corners of my ceiling, I realized that being there had become my entire identity, and maybe it was time to ask, what was left of me when I wasn't needed? The next morning, Saturday, my birthday circled in red ink on the calendar hung by the fridge, came and went without a single call from Brian. I'd bought myself a small slice of chocolate cake from the corner bakery, lit a single candle, and sang softly to myself, embarrassed that the neighbors might hear. The flame flickered, the wax dripped, and when I closed my eyes to make a wish, I couldn't think of anything, because the only thing I wanted was something no wish could bring, to be loved as much as I had loved. the candle burned down, the cake tasted like cardboard, and I sat there with tears rolling silently, realizing that the only person who remembered I existed that day was me. It was the middle of January when the call came at 4:56 a.m., jolting me awake in my small Newark apartment. The kind of call every mother answers no matter how bone-tired she is. Brian's voice was frantic, panicked, words tumbling over themselves. "Mom, please, you have to come. Tyler's burning up. He's shaking. I don't know what to do." I threw on my coat over my pajamas, shoved my feet into boots, and rushed out into the biting cold, heart pounding as I hailed the first cab I could find, praying the driver wouldn't take too long. By the time I reached their house in Montclair, the sky was still black and the frost clung to the grass like glass. I walked through the door and found my grandson Tyler, only 5 years old, curled on the couch, his forehead blazing with fever, his little body shivering. My arms acted on instinct, scooping him up, whispering soothing words, the same ones I used to whisper to Brian when he was small and gasping with asthma attacks. I placed cool washcloths on Tyler's head, measured out children's Tylenol, rocked him against my chest until his trembling slowed. I didn't leave that house for 6 days. I slept on the couch in the living room, rising every few hours to check his temperature, to give medicine, to comfort him when nightmares gripped him. I read him stories until my throat was hoarse, made him little bowls of broth, stroked his hair back from his sweaty forehead, while Vanessa complained from upstairs about the mess of soup bowls in the sink. Brian didn't leave for work all week. He claimed he had urgent deadlines, but what I saw was my son pacing with his laptop, too anxious to really take charge. Vanessa disappeared into conference calls, her immaculate suits hanging on the back of the dining room chairs, while she reminded me to wash my hands because she couldn't afford to catch whatever Tyler had. And me? I was the one holding the line, the one steady presence, just like always. When the doctor finally said Tyler was on the mend, I thought, naively, that maybe this would be the turning point. Maybe my son and his wife would finally see the value of what I gave, the depth of my love, the irreplaceable role I played. And for a fleeting moment, it seemed that way. Brian hugged me tightly, whispering, "Mom, I don't know what we would have done without you." Vanessa even managed a thin thank you, though her eyes darted past me like she was checking for dust. But 2 days later, when I asked Brian if I could take the weekend off, just 2 days to rest my aching back and catch up on my own life, his face tightened, his tone clipped. "Really, Mom? Right now? You know we have that gala on Saturday. Vanessa's presenting an award. We need you here." I laughed bitterly, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it hit me like a slap. 6 days of no sleep, 6 days of saving their child, and the minute I asked for rest, I was an inconvenience. I stared at my son, my baby boy who used to cling to my skirts, who used to whisper that I was his hero, and all I saw was a man who had learned to take me for granted. That night, back in my apartment, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Wrinkled, weary, hollow-eyed, 67 years old and reduced to an invisible caretaker, a shadow in my own family. I remembered the years when Brian was a teenager and would tell me, "Mom, I'll buy you a big house one day. You won't have to work anymore." I remembered believing him. And now here I was, barely able to afford my rent, cleaning up after his kids for free in a house I wasn't even truly welcome in. I thought of the photo albums they kept on their shelves, glossy prints of family vacations to Disney, professional portraits and matching outfits by the fireplace, smiling faces frozen in time. I had flipped through those albums once when no one was looking, searching for my face. And when I found it, I was cropped out, literally cut from the picture, only my arm visible at the edge of a Christmas shot. That discovery had gutted me, but I had swallowed it down, told myself it didn't matter, as long as the kids knew I loved them. But after that week with Tyler, after being treated like a disposable maid the moment he was better, something inside me snapped. Love was not supposed to mean erasing yourself. Love was not supposed to be measured only in what you gave until there was nothing left. That night, lying awake, I whispered words I had never dared to before. Maybe I deserve better. The thought terrified me, but also ignited something in me. For the first time, I wondered if my life didn't have to end in invisibility. The morning of my 68th birthday began like every other Tuesday in my Newark apartment, the alarm clock buzzing at 6 a.m., the kettle whistling, the smell of instant coffee filling the air. I had circled the date in red on my wall calendar, not because I expected balloons or surprise parties, but because I needed to remind myself I was still here, that I had made another lap around the sun. I sat at my little kitchen table, sipping coffee, staring at the silent phone, telling myself not to hope. By 9, the only message I had received was from my bank, alerting me that my Social Security payment had been deposited. I checked the phone every 5 minutes anyway, because even after everything, a part of me still believed Brian might remember. At noon, I gave in and walked to the bakery around the corner, the one with the faded pink awning and the bell that jingled when you opened a door. "Celebrating something, hun?" the clerk asked when I picked out a small vanilla cupcake with buttercream frosting and a single candle. "My birthday," I said, with a smile that felt glued on. She wished me well, asked if my family was throwing me a party, and I lied, saying yes, because the truth was too humiliating. Back home, I set the cupcake on the table, stuck the candle in, and lit it. The flame flickered in the still air, casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper, and I sang softly to myself, the words catching in my throat. I closed my eyes to make a wish, but nothing came. What could I wish for that I hadn't already given and never received in return? I blew out the candle, the smoke curling upward like the years I'd lost, and ate the cupcake in silence. It tasted dry, like cardboard, but I forced each bite down. Later that night, through the thin walls of my building, I heard the neighbors in 3B throwing a party for their grandmother's 80th. Laughter, music, clinking glasses, the squeals of children. I pressed my ear against the wall, tears streaming, listening to what love was supposed to sound like. The next morning, I went to Brian's house as usual, though every step there felt heavier. Tyler ran toward me, his little arms wide, but before he could reach me, Vanessa's sharp voice cut through the air. "Tyler, don't run, the floors just got polished." He stopped, confused, turning those big brown eyes that mirrored his father's when he was small, toward me with uncertainty. I hugged him anyway, inhaling the scent of his shampoo, but the moment was soured. Brian appeared, coffee in hand, scrolling on his phone, barely glancing up. "Morning, Mom, kid schedules are on the counter." That was it. No happy birthday, no acknowledgement of the day circled on my calendar, nothing. I stood there holding the paper list, my heart pounding, wondering how it was possible for a son who once promised to take care of me forever to forget the very day I came into this world. I thought of all the birthdays I'd made magical for him, the homemade cakes, the parties at McDonald's when money was tight, the surprise guitar when he turned 13. I thought of sitting up nights, sewing costumes for his school plays, of working double shifts so he could go to prom in a rented tux. And here I was, 68, invisible, clutching a schedule of dentist appointments and soccer practice as though that were the only thing I was good for. That night, when I finally returned to my apartment, I sat on the couch staring at the cupcake wrapper still sitting on the table, and something inside me hardened. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a pattern. I was no longer a mother to Brian. I was staff, disposable, uncelebrated, unseen. And for the first time in my life, instead of crying, I felt anger rise hot and steady in my chest. Anger that I had traded my entire life for a child who couldn't even remember the day I was born. It was late February when the cracks in our arrangement finally split wide open. Though looking back, I can see they'd been forming for years, hairline fractures hidden beneath layers of silence and guilt. That Thursday started like any other. I got up at dawn, caught the 7:12 train toward Montclair, and walked the last 6 blocks to Brian and Vanessa's Colonial. But when I stepped inside, arms full of groceries I'd bought with my own dwindling pension check, I overheard something that stopped me cold. Vanessa was on the phone in the hallway, her voice sharp with laughter. "Honestly, it's like having free live-in help. Brian's mom does everything. School runs, cooking, cleaning, babysitting. We don't pay her a dime. Can you imagine? It's the best deal in the world." She laughed again, that crisp, cutting laugh that always made me feel like a stray dog scratching at her back door. My chest went tight, and I stood there frozen, bags of apples and cereal digging into my arms, listening to my daughter-in-law reduce 38 years of motherhood into free labor. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand Brian explain why his wife thought my devotion was something to mock. But instead, I swallowed it, plastered on a smile when she spotted me, and went about the day pretending nothing had happened. That night, when I returned to my apartment, I collapsed into my old recliner and sobbed. But not with the helpless grief of years past. This time, the tears were hot with fury. My mind ran through every moment of my life with Brian. The nights I sat by his bedside when his asthma wheezes terrified me. The times I pawned my belongings to fund his dreams. The promises he whispered about taking care of me one day. All of it, every sacrifice, had been reduced to a joke between his wife and her friends. I thought back to my 65th birthday, just 3 years earlier when I waited all day for a call that never came. I had bought a small cake, lit candles, and sat by the phone, convincing myself with every passing hour that he'd remember after work, or before bed, or maybe the next morning. At midnight, I blew out the candles alone and cried myself to sleep. And the next day, his text came. Happy belated mom, crazy day yesterday, love you. A heart emoji was the only proof of his affection. I told myself then that it was enough, that I shouldn't expect more. But now, remembering that day in light of Vanessa's cruel words, I realized how long I'd been excusing the inexcusable. The following week, when Tyler came down with pneumonia, Brian's panic call came again. Mom, please, we need you. And like a fool, I went. I stayed a week on their couch, nursing my grandson back to health while Vanessa slept upstairs and Brian worked from his home office. I didn't complain when my back screamed from the lumpy cushions or when Vanessa asked me to keep the noise down while she prepared for a presentation. I just did what I always did, held my family together while no one noticed the glue was breaking. When Tyler finally bounced back, healthy and laughing, I thought maybe, just maybe, Brian would look at me differently. And for one brief second, he did. He hugged me tight, whispered thank you, his eyes wet with relief, but the moment passed like a summer storm, and within days, things slid back to normal. Orders barked through text messages, Vanessa's clipped instructions left on the counter, Brian's distracted nods. Then came the final straw. 2 days after Tyler was better, I asked Brian if I could take the weekend off. My back ached, my hands trembled from exhaustion. I just wanted 48 hours to sit in my own chair and breathe. Brian's face darkened. Seriously, Mom? Now? Vanessa has a gala Saturday. We need you here. The words hit harder than any slap. I had just carried their household through a week of fear and sickness, and when I asked for the smallest reprieve, I was treated like a flake skipping out on a shift. That night, I looked in my mirror and saw not a mother, not a grandmother, but a worn-out shell, 68 years old and invisible. Something inside me, fragile but fierce, whispered the unthinkable. Maybe I wasn't the problem. Maybe I had been raising the problem all along. The breaking point came on a gray October morning, the kind of morning where the sky looks like it's been painted with ashes. I was back at Brian's house after yet another sleepless night, folding laundry while the kids napped, when my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook, a platform I rarely use but had only because Brian set it up for me years ago. Curiosity made me open it, and what I saw hollowed me out in an instant. There on Vanessa's profile was a glossy photo of their new nanny, a young woman named Madison with straight blonde hair and a bright smile, standing in the backyard with Tyler and Emma perched on her lap. The caption read, "So grateful we finally found someone professional and dependable. The kids adore her. Sometimes change is exactly what a family needs. Hashtag blessed moving forward." My breath caught, the laundry sliding from my hands. Professional and dependable. That's what they called me for decades until suddenly I wasn't. My years of unpaid service, my sleepless nights, my sacrifices, all erased in a single hashtag. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. Friends and acquaintances congratulated Vanessa, praising her for finding balance, complimenting the nanny. No one asked about the grandmother who had been there every day of those children's lives. I was gone, erased, replaced, and celebrated for it. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might stop. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I realized that that silence was permanent now. I was no longer part of their story. That night, back in my Newark apartment, I couldn't sleep. I turned over and over in bed, tears soaking my pillow, fury and grief tangled together until I didn't know which hurt more. At 3 a.m., I got up, pulled out an old notebook, and began to write a letter to Brian. I wrote about my pain, about feeling invisible, about being treated as free labor instead of family. I wrote that I was done being used, that I deserved respect, that I would no longer show up without boundaries. But halfway through, I tore the letter to shreds. What was the point? He wouldn't read it, or worse, he would read it and dismiss it with a sigh. The next morning, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I went to the bank, walked up to the counter, and withdrew every last dollar of my savings. 24,000, built up from Social Security checks, sewing side jobs, and the meager inheritance from my parents. I asked for it in cash, in $50 bills, and when the teller hesitated, warning me it wasn't safe, I smiled and said, "It's safer with me than it ever was in someone else's control." With that money tucked into my worn leather purse, I walked to a real estate office on Broad Street, the kind I'd passed 100 times but never dared to enter. The agent, a woman with sharp glasses and kind eyes, showed me a small one-bedroom condo in Elizabeth, not fancy, but clean, bright, with a balcony overlooking a modest park. $21,000. Cash. Mine. My name alone on the deed. I signed the papers with shaking hands, tears blurring the ink, and for the first time in my life, I owned something that couldn't be taken, couldn't be cropped out of a picture, couldn't be dismissed with a hashtag. That evening, as I sat in the empty condo, light streaming in through wide windows, I felt a strange calm. For decades, my life had been defined by Brian's needs, his schedules, his emergencies. But in that quiet, echoing space, I realized I had built something of my own. Something no one could minimize, a home that was mine, not because I was someone's mother or grandmother, but because I was me. I leaned against the cool wall, closed my eyes, and whispered aloud words I had never dared. The first week in my new condo in Elizabeth felt like stepping into another life. One I had never dared imagine I could have. The space was modest. A single bedroom, a small kitchen, a balcony just wide enough for a chair and a potted plant. But every inch of it was mine. No toys scattered on the floor, no half-finished lists of chores left on the counter. No footsteps above me demanding more than I could give. The first night, I sat at the little kitchen table with a cup of tea and realized that, for the first time in decades, no one knew exactly where I was, and no one could demand I be somewhere else. The silence was mine. But of course, silence doesn't last forever. 3 days later, I opened my door to find Tyler and Emma standing there, their small hands clutching the fingers of a young nanny I had never met. She introduced herself as Madison, the very same girl from the Facebook post, and explained that Vanessa had asked her to drop the kids off because they wouldn't stop crying about Grandma. Tyler rushed forward, burying his face against my waist, sobbing. "Why don't you come home, Grandma? Did we do something wrong?" Emma clung to my leg, her bunny stuffed animal dangling from her tiny fist, whispering, "Mommy says you're too busy for us." My knees buckled as I pulled them both into my arms, the weight of their small bodies both comforting and devastating. They hadn't been told the truth, they had been fed lies to cover their mother's convenience. I invited Madison inside, grateful for her kindness, and while the kids played on my floor with crayons and paper, she leaned close and whispered, "I've been a nanny for 5 years, but I've never seen kids so attached to their grandmother. They talk about you constantly. Honestly, it breaks my heart." I nodded, tears blurring my sight, and realized that whatever anger I had at Brian and Vanessa, my grandchildren couldn't be collateral damage. For 2 hours, I let myself be the grandmother I had always been. I read stories, I made grilled cheese sandwiches, I kissed scraped knees. But when Madison stood to take them back, Tyler clung to my neck, his tears wetting my shirt, begging, "Don't let me go, Grandma. No one hugs me like you do." My heart split, but I forced myself to whisper, "You'll come back soon, I promise." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my new kitchen table with a pen and paper, wrestling with the impossible. I couldn't go back to being their free servant, but I couldn't abandon these children who loved me purely, who hadn't asked for this tug of war. By dawn, I had drafted a letter to Brian, telling him I would consider spending time with the kids again, but only under clear conditions: respect, boundaries, and recognition. I folded it carefully, but before I could deliver it, the phone rang. It was my old friend Lillian from church, her voice tight with concern. "Did you see what Vanessa posted this morning?" she asked. I didn't even have to look to know. It was another shiny Facebook update, a photo of Madison at the park with Tyler and Emma, caption, "Our little family is complete, so thankful for the new chapter." The words hit like a knife. My existence had been erased, my place in the family rewritten. Rage boiled through me, but beneath it, something steadier: resolve. If Brian and Vanessa wanted to write me out of their perfect suburban picture, then I would write myself into a different story. One where I wasn't invisible, one where I wasn't free labor, one where I wasn't ashamed of wanting respect. That evening, I took the torn letter to the trash, poured myself a glass of cheap wine, and sat on my balcony, watching the park below. Children laughed on the swings, couples walked their dogs, and for once, I wasn't haunted by the sound of my phone buzzing with demands. I whispered into the cool night air, "No more." For the first time in my life, I believed it. 2 months passed before Brian finally showed up at my condo, standing awkwardly in the doorway with his hands shoved into his coat pockets like a boy caught misbehaving. His hair was messier than usual, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but his tone carried that familiar edge of entitlement. "Mom, we need to talk." I let him in, gestured toward the couch, and poured us both coffee. He glanced around the condo, his brows furrowing, as though surprised I had managed to build something for myself without his approval. "The kids won't stop asking for you," he admitted. She thinks it's confusing for them, you being here one day and gone the next. But I told her, we need you. Please, just come back. Things will be like before." I stared at him, the son I had raised with blistered hands and sleepless nights, and felt a strange calm settle over me. "Like before," I repeated softly. "Before when? Before you forgot my birthdays? Before you cropped me out of photos? Before you let your wife call me free labor?" His face paled, his mouth opening to protest, but I raised my hand. "I'm not angry anymore, Brian. I'm done being angry, but I will never go back to that house under those terms. If you and Vanessa want me in the children's lives, then it will be on my terms, my schedule, my respect. I am their grandmother, not your maid." The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the radiator. He shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening then loosening. For a moment I thought he would storm out, slam the door, cut me off entirely, but instead his shoulders sagged. "You're right, Mom," he whispered, almost too softly to hear. "I didn't see it. I let Vanessa control everything, and I let myself believe you'd always be there, no matter how we treated you. I'm sorry." The words landed heavy, not because they healed everything, they didn't, but because they acknowledged the truth I had carried alone for too long. I didn't forgive him right away. Forgiveness, I realized, was not a gift owed, but a process earned. But I did agree to see the children every Saturday at my condo, a neutral space where love wasn't laced with obligation. Those Saturdays became sacred. Tyler and Emma would burst through the door, filling my small living room with laughter, crayons, the smell of chocolate chip cookies baking in my oven. They didn't care that my furniture was secondhand, or that my TV was small, or that my balcony overlooked a modest park instead of a manicured lawn. To them, Grandma's house was a place of warmth, safety, love. And for me, it was proof that I could still be part of their lives without losing myself. Months later, on a spring afternoon, I sat on that balcony watching the kids chase pigeons below, and I realized I had done something I never thought possible. I had reclaimed my dignity. I was no longer the invisible woman cropped out of pictures, no longer the unpaid caretaker erased by hashtags. I was a mother who had drawn boundaries, a grandmother who had created her own space, a woman who had finally whispered, "I matter," and believed it. Brian still struggled, caught between his wife's demands and his own guilt, but that was his journey, not mine. Mine was simpler now. To live the years I had left not as someone's servant, but as someone's whole person. I raised my glass of iced tea to the fading sun and whispered, "This is my life now." And for the first time in 68 years, the words didn't feel like resignation. They felt like victory.